All these kafir financial institutions deal in sophisticated magic, in that they create money out of nothing by charging interest, an activity which Allah expressly prohibits in the Quran, saying that those who indulge in it are for the fire. They all work on the understanding that anyone who has been adequately programmed to desire the products of the consumer-producer process will be willing to pay extra if he or she can have immediate possession of the product in question. The extra is calculated in terms of interest. Since all these finance institutions only exist to make money out of people, they are usually merciless in commencing legal proceedings whenever a customer falls behind in payment, especially now that decisions are increasingly being made by computers rather than by human beings, of him or her. The overriding criterion no longer appears to be whether or not someone who needs help is trustworthy, but whether or not he or she is a good investment, that is, whether or not enough money can be made out of him or her. If someone, for example, who, under a mortgage agreement, has agreed to pay over 3 times the amount that would have been payable, if he or she had been able to pay for the house in full at the time of agreeing to buy the house, falls behind on the mortgage repayments after having conscientiously paid them for 20 years, and after he or she has already in fact paid twice the original value of the house, then under the terms of the mortgage agreement, the house will usually be repossessed and sold. And if the proceeds of sale do not cover the outstanding debt, then its former owner will be pursued for the balance. In effect, the end result will be that after having paid for the house 3 times over, he or she will end up without the house and without any money. There can be no doubt whatsoever that usury, in whatever form it takes in charging interest on bank overdrafts or loans, is only one of these forms, is legalized theft. This situation is the complete opposite of that in which one Muslim lends money to another Muslim and is quite prepared to wait long beyond the agreed time of repayment, and, if necessary, relieve the debtor of having to repay the loan altogether, firm in the knowledge that Allah will repay the debt for him or her 10 times over. Indeed, there are some Muslims who refuse to lend money, but will only give it away, on the principle and in the knowledge that if they lend money, they only stand to regain the sum lent. Whereas if they give it away, they will recover 10 times that amount, in accordance with the promise and by the generous outpouring of Allah. This knowledge is entirely lacking in the typical kafir financial institution, which, because of its size and the manner in which it is run, can be utterly ruthless with the most deserving of people, simply because the individual who is borrowing the money never meets the individual who is lending it. The representative of the financial institution is always in a position to say that if he or she could help, then he or she would, but unfortunately rules are rules, and he or she is bound by the rules of the company and his or her contract of employment. Most of the transactions are conducted via computer, and since most computers have not been programmed to be compassionate, for their programmers are not compassionate, accordingly, legal proceedings can be initiated automatically and without deliberation or compassion. Although the insurance companies are concerned primarily with safeguarding products once they have been acquired, by agreeing to pay out money to the owner if the product is lost or damaged in certain specified circumstances, and provided that the owner agrees to pay a specified premium to the insurance company throughout the period of insurance. They also play a large role in the context of personal injury and fatal accident claims, since they are in the insurance trade solely for purposes of business. The amounts they are prepared to pay out on the various claims have already been carefully calculated, so that after they have been paid out, the company will be left with an overall profit. If they can get away with paying less on a claim than they expect, they will have to pay, then they will do so. This means that many claims become the subject of litigation, for it is only when experts' reports have been prepared, and lawyers employed to bargain by correspondence and advise the respective parties as to what sum the judge would be likely to award if the matter went to court, that it may become clear as to how much the claim is really worth. This pattern of activity is another clear example of how the kafir system That is the Dajjal system, creates activity in order that money can be made out of it. The kafir civil legal process is like the kafir criminal legal process. It makes money out of other people's misfortunes. A person who breaks an arm at work because, for example, he was given a faulty ladder to use, will not receive any financial compensation for his injury until after the insurance company has been involved, solicitors and barristers have been involved, medical experts have been involved. And if agreement cannot be reached, until the matter has been finally settled in court. In a simple case like this, the costs of all these different entities being involved will be greatly in excess of the sum which is finally recovered by the victim of the accidents. The truth of the matter is that this pattern of activity is not really for the benefit of the victim. It is more for the benefit of the so-called experts, without whose help the victim can recover nothing. This is the key to the Ka-6R system, that is the Dajjal system. Once the experts who control that system have persuaded the majority of the population to rely on their services, then the position and income of the experts, and therefore the continued existence of that system, is assured. The Muslim community has no need of these so-called experts. In the case of unexpected damage to property or injury to life and limb, the members of the community help each other out. Where appropriate, money can be distributed from the Bayt el-Mal, that is, the fund into which the members of the community pay the minimal taxes required by the Quran. The only taxes which a Muslim is obliged by Allah to pay are the zakat, which is a tax of 2.5% of any capital or income above a certain amount which has been accumulated and not used for at least a year. In other words, wealth which is over and above what its owner actually needs in order to live, and a tax of 2.5% on merchandise above a certain amount which has remained in stock for at least a year, and a tax, often percent, on naturally watered crops, which is to be paid in the form of 1/10 or 1/20 of what has actually been harvested, and a tax of a small proportion of any herd of livestock over a certain size, and a tax of 2.5% of the value of all mineral and subterranean resources which are mined. There is also the zakat al-fitr, which is for both hands cupfuls of a local staple food, usually grain or dried fruit, payable by or on behalf of every Muslim in the community at the end of Ramadan, which is the lunar month during which every adult Muslim in good health fasts between dawn and sunset. Finally, if a Muslim finds buried treasure, he or she must pay a tax on it of 20%. All these taxes are paid into the Bayt el-Mal. Since the way of Islam is based on giving out, a real Muslim community ensures that the contents of this central fund are immediately distributed to those in need, as defined in the Quran and the Sunnah, as quickly as it fills up. Since the taxes are gathered in at different times of the year, it follows that the Bayt el-Mal is continually being filled, expended, and replenished. The taxes are so simple that they can be understood by someone who is illiterate. There is thus no need for the expert to interpret and administer them. There are two other taxes, payable by non-Muslims, which are equally simple. The jizya tax, which is paid by all adult males of the al-Dhimma, that is, any non-Muslims living under Muslim rule and protection. The amount per head, which can be reduced in cases of real poverty, is 4 dinars of gold or 40 dirhams of silver each year. This is approximately the equivalent, at the time of writing this, of 20,000 English, or $300 American, by virtue of paying the jizya tax. The al-Dhimma do not have to fight if the Muslim community is attacked, and are entitled to protection by the Muslims during such an attack. The other tax is 10% on imports into Muslim territory from other countries, which is levied on traders who are not Muslim. The absolute simplicity of the Muslim taxes means that they can be gathered with ease. There is thus none of the unnecessary activity which is engendered by the kafir tax laws, which are so complex and so oppressive that they create the demand for legal experts to interpret them and find ways of evading and avoiding them, and for a complex bureaucratic system to collect them and, of course, provide the authorities with the work of catching tax offenders, and the kafir legal system with more business in dealing with them. Since Muslim taxes are so low, virtually everyone can afford to pay them, especially since they are only payable out of what a person actually possesses, and not on what someone may have earned during the year. A Muslim, for example, who has an annual income of £1 million or dollars, would not have to pay any zakat on this amount if none of it had been accumulated for at least a year or more. It is quite evident that, after the regulation of society, the main concern of many kafir legal system is making money and creating situations from which money can be made, not justice. It follows that the outcome of a good many cases depends not on the facts or the merits of the case, but on who is going to have to pay the costs. This means that there are two laws, one for the rich and one for the poor. This means that the kafir legal system favors those who control the kafir system, that is the Dajjal system, at the expense of those who are enslaved by that system. The profits involved are increased by the fact that since the kafir legal machine involves much bureaucracy, there is much delay. This delay is a disadvantage to the accused or to the litigant, as the case may be, since when events are no longer fresh in people's minds, the outcome of the case becomes more uncertain. As far as the people involved with the conduct of the case are concerned, however, any delay means more pay. The kafir legal system, the heart of the kafir system, that is, the Dajjal system, creates work for itself and is provided with work by virtue of the way in which the producer-consumer system operates, and it makes vast sums of money out of that work, whilst at the same time maintaining the status quo, which ensures that work continues to be made available. Only those who know how the kafir system, that is, the Dajjal system, works, and who help to control it, share in the profits which arise from the way in which it operates. Everyone else loses out, in monetary terms, at any rate. Of course, in the final analysis, success or failure can only be measured in terms of whether you end up in the garden or in the fire and the life after this one. And one looks at the kafir system, that is the Dajjal system, from this Quranic perspective, then it is clear that the kafir controllers, who imagine that they have got it made in this world, are in for a big shock in the next one. It follows that the following excerpt from a letter from the London branch of the banking firm of Rothschild Brothers, dated the June 25, 1863, and addressed to the New York Bank of Leckelheimer, Morton, and van der Gould, which was quoted by Ezra Pound in his writings, and which gives some indication of both the nature and the identity of the iceberg of institutionalized usury, which has so deeply affected the characteristics and quality of life in the 20th and 21st centuries, is only of limited accuracy when viewed from a kafir perspective, and of none when viewed from a Quranic perspective. The few who understand the system will either be so interested in its profits, or so dependent on its favors, that there will be no opposition from that class, while, on the other hand, the great body of people, mentally incapable of comprehending the tremendous advantages that capital derives from the system, will bear its burden without complaint, and perhaps without even suspecting that the system is inimical to their interests. It must be emphasized that the prophetic mode of existence is the complete opposite of the kafir system, that is, the Dajjal system. Kufr creates complexity. Islam embodies simplicity. In the Muslim community, there is a complete absence of institutions and bodies of experts whose livelihood and continued existence depends on creating work for themselves by feeding off other people's misfortunes. The Prophet Muhammad, may the blessings and peace of Allah be on him, said, "We are an illiterate community. We do not write and we do not calculate. Human transactions in a Muslim community are conducted on the basis of mutual trust, and not on the basis of a spurious legal validity which necessitates paperwork. The Quran and the Sunnah contain all the guidance an individual human being or group of people needs. Where disputes arise, they can be settled by reference to what is in the Quran and the Hadith, and not necessarily by reference to other people's decisions in similar fact situations in the past, or to complex, arbitrary, and forever changing laws and rules. It is true that there are those who have attempted to make a legal system, based on one or more kafir legal systems, out of some of the teachings of Islam, but they cannot be regarded as Muslims, and must be ignored. They are merely the fulfillment of the Prophet Muhammad's prophecy, may Allah bless him and grant him peace, that there would be those who, in the name of Islam, would follow the example of their predecessors, meaning the Jews and the Christians, just like a lizard making for its hole. That is, by compromising and abandoning the guidance which their prophet had brought. The nature of the real Muslim community is such that there can be no consumer-producer process, because the Muslims know that they were not created for that purpose. That there can be no educational system such as is operated by the kafir system, that is the Dajjal system, because the Muslims do not need to be conditioned to be exploited. Because the basis of a Muslim community is the worship of Allah and not the exploitation of others. And because the knowledge which the true Muslims have is certain knowledge, derived from the Quran and the Hadith, directly from Allah and His Messenger, and not the often useless or irrelevant speculative information in which the kafir educational system largely traffics. That there can be no medical system, because the Muslim, by virtue of this or her way of life, is basically healthy and when sick, uses a different form of healing to that employed by the kafir medical system. That there can be no legal system, because the guidance in the Quran and the Hadith is complete, and does not need to be changed or amended, and because anyone can follow it without the necessity of experts to interpret it, and because it can only be followed if it is accepted voluntarily, and not if it is imposed by or on others. That there can be no financial systems which operate on the basis of charging interest, because not only are these forbidden by Allah, but also because Muslim commerce is based on generosity and giving out, and not on being mean and retention. In a real Muslim society, there are no faceless institutions. There are no banks as we know banks today. There are no prisons and no law courts, and there is no police force, or standing army for that matter. The ruler is the person whom everyone has accepted as their ruler, and who follows what is in the Quran and the Sunnah. Since there is no ruling elite, for the way of Muhammad expressly forbids dynastic rule, and whoever adopts dynastic rule does so in defiance of the guidance sent by Allah, it follows that there is no body of people who, because they wish to exploit the rest of the population, need to have both the means of oppression and the means which are used to disguise the nature of that oppression. Whenever anyone in a Muslim community goes beyond the limits of Allah, as indicated in the Quran and the Hadith, in a manner which harms someone else or the community as a whole, then that person is dealt with, in accordance with what is in the Quran and the Hadith, by the community through its leader and on the spot, without delay. No one in a Muslim community should be deprived of their liberty for more than 3 days, no matter what they may have done. Everyone inclines to wrong action, at some time or other. The compassionate way in which the Prophet Muhammad, may Allah bless him and grant him peace, dealt with those who had gone beyond the limits set by Allah, provides a clear example of how to rule, for all those who have been chosen to rule. He directed rulers not to reach a conclusion until they had heard both sides of the story, and not to sit in judgment if they were angry or constipated. He never built a prison. The fact that anything which occurs in a Muslim community, and which requires a decision is dealt with on the spot, means that there is no room for bureaucracy or bureaucrats or paperwork. In a Muslim community, justice is not a matter of who pays the costs, because there are no costs of the kind which the operation of kafir legal systems engenders to pay.